Welcome back to Property Tribes TV, and it's time for a long overdue catch up with our partner for London property, and that is Marc from Benham and Reeves. And Marc, we were just
Hello.
saying it's been ages
It
since we
has.
last spoke, and there's so much to catch up upon.
Yeah.
First of all, as many people know, I've been away most of this year. I went back to my previous life in the music industry, and my personal London portfolio has been pretty much on the back burner. It's fully tenanted. I've had no rent arrears, but I've kind of lost a little bit of a track of what's going on in the London market. So perhaps you could give us your views on that as we speak in the autumn of 2025.
Sure. So, yeah, it has been ages, and we mustn't let it be so long next time. And I think actually what you said is really interesting. I will talk about the market. I think what's really interesting is you've now focusing on your other area, and so actually you just said you've lost focus touch with what's going on. And actually, what's ridiculous is everybody thinks that they read their newspaper every day. If you're lucky, they leave the news and they think they know what's going on, but actually, unless you're in it, I don't know how you know what's going on. And I sit in every day, and even I struggle to know what's going on all the time. So actually, that's why it's so important to have work with a good agent and not rely on reading in. I mean, Property Tribes is a brilliant place to get source of information, but you really need to have a decent agent. And ideally, if you're not have the time, you really don't have the time to manage it, you need a managing agent. I cannot recommend it enough. And I think that's really interesting that you yourself have said it, because you run Property Tribes and that's a landlord's information. I think that's really interesting. But
Well, let
where's
me
the
just
market?
jump in there, Marc. Two things just to pick up on what you said before you give us your view. First of all, I think it's a testament to property investment and all my fully managed properties, including the ones that are managed by Benham and Reeves, that I was able to go back to my
Yeah,
previous life and I could actually run my business from a tour bus. So
amazing.
nothing really changed other than my focus, as you rightly
Yeah,
said. Secondly, so important where you get your information from. There are so many AI videos doing the
yeah.
rounds, which people seem to unfortunately lap up. And I watch them and I think, no, that's incorrect. So sorry to jump in there, but
No, no, no.
I
And I
just
think you're
wanted to
right.
say
I
that,
think I think
we're
you're
so
100% right.
we're so
100% right.
grateful
So
to have good commentators like you to contribute to Property Tribes.
yeah, and I think you're 100% right. I think where you get your information is really, and people say to me, where's the best place? I can't tell you. I think the best place is read what you can, but then ask your agent every now and then what's happening. And if you see something coming up, ask. I mean, no one, I don't mind. I get asked every single day, the bits and pieces. And we're going to talk about renters' rights, I'm sure, in a minute. But where's the market been this year? So we have seen capital prices, i.e., sell prices, they have moved up a little bit, but the market has been quite challenging. And when I say challenging, I'm not saying it's challenging in terms of investment. I think bricks long term are the best investment anybody's going to make long term. But I think the market resales has been okay in the normal market, but investors from overseas and the UK especially are few and far between because of the stamp duty changes, the taxes that we have now. If you're in the market, if you own a property, unless you desperately need that money, you must be mad to sell, because if you want to then re-enter, the costs are going to lose you 10 to 15% of that, of the money that you have. So one thing I say to anybody, unless you're desperate for the money, don't sell it just because you've got a profit or you're worried about the law changes, which we'll talk about. You should hang on to it. So the market prices have been flat. They've small uptick, and some have seen higher. It depends on supply and demand, who wants the property at the right time. But actually, it's been pretty solid. We've seen mortgage rates come off, and I'm not just talking about Bank of England dropping the base rate down to 4%. The actual rate you borrow at, I just borrowed buy-to-let loan at 3.8%. So actually, yes, for me that was incredibly painful, like I'm sure all of your watchers and listeners, it's incredibly painful. I went from 1.6% to 3.8%. That's horrible. That's 2.5 times increase in my repayments. However, I think around 4% is where it should be. And always used to work on the basis myself, because I'm slightly cautious, is I would say interest rates 4%, even though I'm paying 1.6, and I would save that extra to pay down my loan. That's what I did. Now I'm only going to pay down a little bit of my loan. But the point is, I'm still in positive cash flow on every single one of my properties with interest rates. And I've got one that I did last year that's at 5.4%, and that quadrupled. And that property still to date is in positive cash flow. So I'm still not having to take out of my salary to pay. So that's the good news. Rentals have been continue to be strong this year, not as strong as they were last year or the year before, where rents have been shooting up, because that's unsustainable.
Mm.
We saw post-COVID big increases in rents for about 3-4 years, and now we are seeing modical, inflation-led increases thereabouts. So that's really good. We haven't seen drops. We've seen lots of students over the summer period because of Donald Trump. He doesn't like foreigners. So actually, there have been lots coming. Australia's going to have a change. So you're going to see continuing growth in the education market if you're in London and prime cities. They don't all go into student accommodation because there isn't enough. And so they are still renting privately. So student market's been strong. Tech sector has been incredibly strong with the Google new landscape scraper building they have, Meta are here, all of the big tech companies around the Shoreditch area and spread across London. London's top tech city in the world now, just declared. Yes, we call ours the Silicon Roundabout, which I think is dreadful. Instead of, the US got Silicon Valley and we get a soddy roundabout. But the point with it is, for an old developed country to have such a strong cutting edge tech sector is brilliant. And that's good for the economy, but also lots of these guys rent, because whether they're British people and they're coming from rest of the country, moving there, they're on growth sector. They don't all buy. In fact, very few of them buy. Most of them rent. And if it's the large corporates where they're bringing them in, they're renting. So the rental market's still quite strong. We've seen a increase in numbers of people from overseas renting, which has been really good, as opposed to we'd seen over the last few years more local people renting. We've actually seen a slight uptick this year in overseas people renting. We had a big uptick in our Japanese desk. We have a Japanese team that look after Japanese corporates, and they have seen a 15% increase in tenancies this year. So the market is very, very, very solid. I think it's in a good place. Yes, the sales market is challenging, but that only affects you if you need to exit. So my advice to everybody is, now is the worst time to exit. We are in a buyer's market. So this is the time to invest if you can afford it and you have the money and want to put a little bit aside. I think this is a good time to add to a portfolio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you summed it up when you said it's solid and it's stable if you are already in the market. And if you're thinking of getting into the London market, there are clearly opportunities to buy at perhaps a deep discount. So that's actually very posive.
I think it's very,
now
I think
we
the market's
mentioned
very positive.
we actually mentioned the Renters' Rights Act, which is now live. Doesn't come in until, well, we think next April. But obviously, as an agency, you've had to prepare both your agency and your landlords for this new legislation, this new era of the private rented sector. So what have you been doing to prepare for the Renters' Rights Act?
Really good question. So this is the biggest topic on everybody's lips. So I have just come back from a 5-week tour of Asia. I visited 8 cities, and I was
you've been on tour as well.
Yeah, not that. Unfortunately, no music and no late night parties. But I was doing an update on the renters' rights. We had an average of 50 people per night that I did it. and probably I met 500 people came, and I've done 3 webinars now talking about this because it's really scary. If you're not in the day to day and in the nitty gritty, all you read are the negatives. So let me give where I see it. Number one, you don't need to sell your property and run for the hills in a buyer's market because you're terrified. Let us look at why you buy an investment property or why you buy a property, whether that's London, Manchester, Birmingham, anywhere in the UK. You buy it for 2 reasons. Number one, for investment, or number two, for you or your kids to occupy. So the renter's rights is going to remove the ability to just kick a tenant out with 2 months' notice at any time. That's gone. So they've adopted the European model where if a tenant wants to live in your home for as long as they like, they are able to do that. And actually, that's not a bad thing. For me as a landlord, you as a landlord also, Vanessa, you want your tenants to stay 5, 10 years because someone who lives in a property for a long time, it's their home. As long as you maintain it, you've got a home forever. No voids, no decorating mid-tenancy, none of these things that cost landlords on their return. So actually, long term, we really like. But of course, a lot of people are worried. If I want to sell because I want to exit, I need to give the money to my kids, I want it for my pension, can I still sell? Well, the government have allowed 4 months' notice to give the tenant to leave so you can sell your property. Sales in the UK take on average 7 months to a year to sell. So 4 months is fine. It's longer than 2 months, but come on, you're kicking people out of their home. So I don't think 4 months is unreasonable if you're selling. So that's okay. Secondly, if you want to live in it yourself because you worked overseas or you went on your tour and you rented your flat, you can give them 4 months' notice to come back and live in it. And let's be honest, if your kids are gonna go to university here, or you're gonna move back into your home because you're relocating back from overseas, more than 4 months in advance. So again, that's not too long. And I don't think it's bad to give someone 4 months' notice if they've been there for 3, 5, 10 years. So again, you can kick them out. The tenant can go if you want to sell, you want to live in it yourself. Thirdly, the other thing you want to do is make money. There's been lots of talk about rent controls and not being able to put the rent up and this argument. Government has said once a year, you can put the rent up, which is what we do now anyway, in line with the market rent. The difference now is you're going to have to prove what the market rent is. And so you'd need an agent to give you evidence. Basing it on Rightmove, Best Price Guide, or Zoopla's Index, I don't think that will work because you'll go to the tenant and say, I want to put the rent up to £1,500 a month. You're paying 1,400, and they say, no, 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 it's too much. And you say, well, that's the market rent. Here's my proof. They have the right to take you to a tribunal. The tribunal are now going to set the rent at the market rent. And so the tenant then has the ability to leave or stay and pay the rent. Now that's, for me, it's good for landlords because landlords are now going to not get stuck with having to heavily negotiate unless they want to. They're just going to say, this is the rent. Agents advise me. Here's the evidence. And if you don't agree, we're going to go to a tribunal. And so actually, I think that gives some certainty to the process. And if the tenant doesn't pay or if the tenant causes damage, they're going to get out. So the reality is there's nothing to worry about. And I maintain that within a year and probably 2 years' time, no one will even be talking about this. It will just have become the new norm. And so we'll just move forward from it. Of course, there are going to be anomalies in there. And there are always going to be people that try to get the better of someone else, to try and elongate the process of eviction or don't move out and not paying rent. That's the situation now. So nothing's going to change with that. The government feel that because the system is going to allow, no, you're not going to be able to Section 21 notices. It's going to be fewer evictions and so therefore fewer problems through the courts. I don't know because the courts were over-resourced that it's going to be any better, sorry. But I don't think it'll be any worse and I hope it'll get better. And so it hasn't worried me. And I think a lot of people are much more satisfied when they hear that. As you said, it's now law. It'll come in next year. I would say from March, April, May, June onwards. And I don't see a problem. Obviously, there are other things in the law around looking after the property, making sure it's maintained, no mold, and the boiler works and all of that. But as a business, we do that anyway. And I don't have landlords that don't fix mold or have no heating. We don't have properties like that. And this is really good. And I see that as a benefit. So again, if you're a professional landlord or you're working with a professional agent, it won't affect you. So my view is reform, Renters' Rights Act. I think it's I think it's palatable and I'm not worried. And so it's a change we have to put up with, but I'm not worried about it, and no landlord should be.
I think that the penalties for non-compliance are a lot higher,
Yep,
and that is something that perhaps amateur landlords, or if you want to call them that, probably should be nervous of. But to me, one way to resolve that is to just work with a reputable agent like
100%.
yourselves, who are members of Property Marc, who have all the proper
Yep,
compliance. And I
100%.
think one thing that will occur is that there should be an enhanced focus on tenant referencing,
Oh, 100%.
because once you have an irresponsible tenant in your property, it's going to take a lot longer and be a lot harder to remove them. There is no doubt about that. We have court times now, if you have to go the Section 8 route, over a year. That could be
Yep,
14, 15, 18 months of not receiving any
yep,
rent. So I think there's going to be it needs to be a enhanced focus on tenant referencing, which
yep,
reputable letting agents would do anyway. But
yep,
also, are you, for instance, suggesting that your landlords get rent guarantee insurance? Because
yep,
I've always had that. And
100%.
under the, auspices of the Renters' Rights Act, I think
Yep.
it's an absolute no-brainer.
So there are two things. So one thing I didn't mention is upfront payments are banned. So if you have a student coming from China, at the moment we ask them for 6 or 12 months in advance. They pay that. I might add, of the 700 students we have on renting from us at the moment, and over the last 10 years, we've not had one student who hasn't paid the rent. We've not had one. So international students, I never think there's a problem with. However, you're going to have to ask them for monthly payments. And I don't think they're going to come from China, spend £200,000 on a degree, and then they're going to try and chip you on the rent. However, they might be slow. It's a bit of a pain chasing them, and their language and all of that could be a problem wherever people are coming from. However, what we're now suggesting is to get a UK guarantor. There are UK guarantor companies out there. They pay for that. You don't, and then you don't need rental insurance because you're guaranteed. So actually, students actually fit quite well to protect landlords, and they're only here for 2, 3 years, going to rent from you, and then they're going to go. So actually, it gives movement, and the London market is very movement anyway. Our average tenancy is just under 3 years anyway, so I don't see so many longer term tenancies in London. It will be different outside of London, but in London. So, number one, there's rent guarantor for tenants, which the tenant pays for. Number two is the one you're talking about, rental insurance for landlords. 100% that's a good thing. It's not super expensive. A lot of landlords come round, and we have it at the moment. We have such a low uptake in it. And even though we tell people to take it, so few landlords are like yourself and realize how painful it can be if things go wrong. But they say, well, I've seen the references, I've looked at everything, it's going to be fine. I don't want to spend three, four, £500 a year, whatever it is. And I get that. But if things go wrong and your tenant doesn't pay and you have to evict them, the time and the costs and the legal costs really add up at a huge rate. And it will be more than 10 or even 15 years premium. So actually, I think it's a really good thing. So you just have to be careful that your agent, or that you don't end up with double cover with the guarantor for the tenant and rental insurance for yourself, because number one, they'll argue of who's going to be responsible, and number two, you might not need to be paying for it. But 100%, rental insurance is the way to go. And I take it on all my properties, like you say, even though I'm an agent and my team are meant to be doing the right job, I never know. And I don't want to end up with no rent for 6 months or something. I
Mm,
just don't want that. And remember that everybody thinks they're crooks, people that don't pay rent. They really aren't. Some people fall on terribly hard times. They lose their job, their partner becomes sick. They it's expensive in London at the time, and they run on hard times, and the last thing they do, they start not paying the rent, and they come and they want to leave. But if they go to citizens advice or the council, they tell them sit there until you're evicted. So
mm,
actually you end up unwittingly, you're stuck getting no money because actually the tenant would quite happily leave. We have them where they ring and say, I can't afford to rent, but I've got nowhere to go. And I've been to the council and they tell me they won't rehouse me until I'm evicted. Now, for me, that's shocking. That's absolutely shocking because these people are upset, and I hear it all the time from other agents where that happens. And actually, that's a seismic change that councils should be doing and the government, but no one will do it. And so rental insurance is very important.
mm. Well, the councils, local authorities have been told by the government not to say that, but
And
and
they
that was
do,
like 3 years ago, but they're
still
still
do.
doing it. And I think it's just because, obviously, as we know, of the lack of social housing,
Yep.
they don't have anywhere to put
They have
them.
nowhere
So
to
they
put them.
try and, keep as many tenants as possible in the private rented sector.
Yep.
And there's no increase in house building or social housing
No,
to speak of.
no.
So I can only assume that tenant demand is going to remain very high. And
Yep.
as landlords, that gives us quite a significant pool of tenants to choose
Yep.
from.
100%.
We're probably far from the days of last time I rented out one of my flats with you, where we had 105 applicants
Yeah, I know it's
by
mad, huh?
midday. I don't know if it's still as crazy as that, but I foresee it being, as you said, steady.
Yep. 100%
London,
steady.
London is a world-class city, and people always want to come there. So I'm kind of just got everything ticking along in the background at the
Every
moment.
I
Obviously,
do too. I do
yeah,
too.
we've got the
Exactly the
budget,
same.
which is obviously more
Yeah, of
uncertainty.
course, it's going to be more negativity, and I don't know. I mean,
Yeah. But
look,
you've got to, as you've always said, Mark, and we always reiterate, property is a long-term investment. And you need to hang in through the storm, because there's always calm waters afterwards.
100%.
And
Look,
I've
if
had
you
that proved many times.
100% long-term hold with debt on it, because that your income should pay down your debt, even with higher interest rates. Then you go interest only and you wait, and you know it's a great long-term wealth build. You can't dip in and out and use it on holidays because you can't. So it sits there as a forced pension build. Yes,
Mhm.
it tax treatment is not as good as it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. No, it's not. But neither is income tax, neither are all sorts of other areas. But I still maintain it's as good as anything else, and it's because it's the solidity surrounding and the relative illiquid nature. It
Yeah.
stops short-termism.
It does. And I think the fundamentals have pretty much remained the same since I got started with my portfolio building
Yeah,
in 2004 with Nick. We we understood the fundamentals, that we're only an island,
yep,
that there's not enough house building
no,
to meet the demand, and all of these things create market forces that ultimately support, being a property investor. But I
yep,
guess as we round this up, Mark, you are a London landlord yourself. You're
yep,
totally immersed in the London property market
yep,
24/7, 365. And I like to say you're always there. If people are interested in purchasing in
sure,
London, they can
yep.
always contact you to get some pointers. If you were actively investing now, or somebody called you up tomorrow and said, I want to invest in the London property market, where would you guide them? And do you have any preferred areas or any particular property types that you think should be considered?
So I think that's the $1 million question, right? I get it. If I knew when the bottom of the market was and I knew when the top was and I could buy at the bottom and sell at the top. I mean, everybody make. I think number one, first thing to do to start is you have to be ready. You have to have your money ready to go. Don't start spending hours and weeks researching on portals and looking around. And then you find something you really like, and then you're rushing around trying to find the deposit and you overstretch yourself. You should be ready and have an idea on how much you can borrow. So speak to a broker is fine, and
Very
have
good
an
advice.
idea on what you want to do. So be ready. That's when you buy, you should buy when you're ready. And I bought something end of last year, an investment. It was a great deal because I inherited a bit of money. And so I was very lucky and I put some of my own, which savings that I made from my other properties together and bought that. And actually, that's a great, that was, it's probably turned out to be my best investment. And I bought it in a shocking market in terms of with all the taxes on it. This was the end of last year with all of the stamp duty, everything going on. Now, so where would I buy now? What would I buy? I think smaller units, 1 and 2 bedrooms, are still the way to go. And if it's 2 bed, it must be 2 baths. Because if you buy a 2 bed with 1 bathroom, it's viewed as a 1 bed with a study, and you will get lower rent and lower resale value. Everyone says, oh, they're so much cheaper. They're so much cheaper for a reason, because resale. So I would always try and buy a 1 bed or a 2 bed, 2 bath.
Yeah, and with regards to a two-bed, Mark, I always recommend that both rooms are the same size
Idea if you can, but
if
that's
you can.
very, very, very hard to find. As long as the
Both
second
bedrooms, yeah.
bedroom can get a double bed in. What you don't want is a one. I've got a flat actually where my office is here. It's a 3 bedroom, and the third bedroom was a study. And they, the owner wanted it as a bedroom. He put a sofa bed in there, but then he put a wardrobe in there. And actually now it's so tiny that they have to sleep on it as a sofa on the sofa. It's ludicrous. As long as you can get a double bed in, then it will work. But if you can't, be very careful, especially on a 2 or a 3 bedroom. It's really important. So that's in terms of the type of property. Location is how much is really what you want to spend. So I was lucky. I did have a fair whack. I bought in Kensington off the high street. But the last flat in the building sold for 1.4, and I bought mine for 950. Now, that for me is a significant deal. And actually, the valuer, when he did the valuation for, I borrowed from Santander because it was easy stack up, and the rates was, as I said, 3.8%. I borrowed from them last year, 3.9% actually. There, he came back and asked whether he'd missed something on the price. He rang me saying, I've got a price you have 950, and I'm struggling to understand how you bought it at 950. It's because that was the price I was willing to pay, and that's the price the vendor accepted. It was pure arm's length. I bought it through another agent. But the fact is, you can get good deals. Now, that's a lot of money, but in time, my daughter might live there. But the point is, I would look at not limit yourself to the outer zones. Zone 3, Zone 4, Zone 5 is what everybody's talked about over the last few years because the yields are higher, the capital value is lower. But at the moment, zones 1 and 2, some pockets, there is incredible value there. So you need to, as I said, process for me should be how much cash can I put together when I'm ready? And then work out what you can borrow reasonably. And that's what you should look at. And then if you have, let's say, a total amount with your loan of £500,000, go and look at stuff at 600 as well as at 500, 600, 650. You never know. Don't fall in love and then drive your budget through the roof and start borrowing money willy-nilly. But go and look at stuff and make a cheeky bid. If you've got your loan pre-authorized and you've got enough cash, and banks say you're ready to go with 500,000 in total, and you look at something at 600, you think actually that's really good. You offer 500, say this is my money, but I'm ready to go. And you never know. People will accept deals at the moment, and that is the way I am, and that is the way I buy. Always look for a bit more, and you never know. But in terms of location, zones 3, 4, 5 are still very good. The yields are anywhere 6.5%. Your zones 1 and 2 are 4-ish, 4, 4.5, 5 at the absolute max. But you know, remember, it's not all about income, it's about long-term capital growth and location. So when you're asking to name a location, I think it's really hard.
Yeah, I
I
understand.
I think it's about how much money you have. If you have 300,000 to spend, you're obviously not going to buy in the center. You would buy zone 4, zone 5. You want to look at new builds, even though everyone says don't buy new builds at the moment, some developers are doing 20% discounts. You might be able to buy a new build where it's the person bought it, but now they can't afford to complete, where you're going to save on what they agreed a year ago. You might be able to buy a new build that completed a year ago, so prices were cheaper and they're desperate to get out. You might buy a new build that's 3, 4 years old. I bought a year and a half ago, I bought in a building in Hammersmith where I bought a 1 bedroom flat in 2018 for 500,000. It's rented on a 5% yield forever. And someone in there was selling a 2 bedroom. He was desperate. I picked it up for 650. He paid 950 for it. Now, that's a bargain. I got it almost the same price. It worries me on the value of my 1 bed. But what I'm saying is you can get great deals. And the amount of rent I get on the 2 bed is I get so much positive cash flow on that flat, even with a 70% loan, that I'm paying both of them down and I'm saving some money to make extra lump sum repayments. Because just the final point that I would say on property, again, everybody's negative, but bear in mind, if you buy something today for £300,000 and you borrow 200, okay, so you borrow 200,000 and you put 100,000 cash down, over 20 years, if you hold it that long, and the market hasn't moved a penny, and that 300 is still worth 300, or maybe it would increase to cover your stamp duty, if your rent has covered your service charge and your agent's fees and maintenance and paid off your mortgage, you've turned your 100,000 into 300,000. Now, if you bought that in equities, you can't borrow money. And your 100,000, yes, it gets a dividend. Over 20 years, you have to see the market triple in value. You have to see that triple in order to turn your 100 into 300,000. Whereas with property, your yield is going to be given because you're renting it. So bear that in mind. That's what I really say. I don't care if I want my portfolio to increase in value, but I don't really mind if it only increases a tiny bit in order to cover stamp duty, because if my mortgage is paid off, then I've increased my global wealth. What a lot of mistakes investors make is they say, I pay 300,000. That was my investment. That is wrong. Your investment is your cash you put in.
Mm.
And that is what people forget again and again. And they say, well, I paid 300 and it's only gone up. It's not gone up. So I've actually not made any money. You have, because you've had the income and you should have paid some of your loans. So that's my tuppence worth of advice. And I'm always happy if anybody wants it, but I think it's very good. Look, it's not as amazing as it was 10, 15, 20 years ago, but it is still good. London will always be London. And the UK will always be the UK, and we're never going to be building on Hyde Park or the Yorkshire Dales. So they're always going to be a shortage of supply and increased demand.
Mhm.
That's my last, sorry,
Yeah,
rant.
no, totally 100% agree with you on that comment. And just to round this off, I do think it's interesting that you went for a high value property, because I think in times of uncertainty, which we are in at the moment,
We
without
are
any doubt, my mantra has always been quality, not quantity. So you could
100%.
have actually maybe bought two properties
I
for
could.
900,000, but you went for
I could.
a
And you're
higher
right.
value property.
You're right. I had to stretch myself a little bit, to be fair. The reason I bought a 2 bedroom is because it was a deal. The last 1 bedroom had sold the year before for 900, and I bought a 2 bed for
Yeah,
950.
yeah,
And
that's
and
absolutely awesome.
and I honestly, I I work in the business, and yes, people will now be messaging me saying, "Mark, come and find me a deal like that." There are deals like that, And I moved very quickly. I told her I'd pay it. They agreed it. I instructed the law the same day. I had already finance pre-approved, and we did it within 6, 7, 8 weeks. I think it was just under 2 months because I'm ready and here to go. And I don't ever do searches. I always take search insurance out to make the process go quickly. But as I said, you're right. Everything else I have are one bedrooms, except for my house. Everything else are one bedrooms and studios because that's what I bought a two bedroom because of the deal, the value of
Yep, yep,
it.
yep, yep. I
And
get
so
that.
I think investors who are buying, quality is important, but get some advice. I mean, honestly, agents should be advising you. And I would always, my advice still is, even though we do sales, is go to someone independent. Ask them what you're going to rent it for because they're not earning on the sales. Don't listen to the agent selling it to you. Go ask someone else
Mm.
because then you at least have someone else say, I'm going to give this to rent. What are you going to get for it? They're not going to lie to you. Whereas the sales agent might be might be more generous with the rent.
Okay. Well,
Cool.
thank you so much for your words of wisdom,
Thank you
as
very much.
always. Lovely to catch up with you.
You
And
too.
as you say, I think we need to do this more often because I think, there is so much opportunity in London. And even if you owned, I think, one property in London in 20, 30 years' time, you'd be grateful that you purchased it. So I've never regretted any of the flats that we have
Okay.
kept in London that we